think we're ready. So, I'm Ian Muehlenhaus. Thank you for coming so early in the morning. Like I said, a lot of you were there. It was pretty wild last night. Martin, I apologize. Where are you? I apologize. I think he was having a heart attack that I wouldn't make it here. But I made it. Tanya, thanks for being a good driving partner. We both flew in from Redlands and hightailed it up here. I've never used my brights so much. So, today, my talk, I've been on and having about the title of this, kind of like George Lucas about the title of Return of the Jedi. I just changed it this morning, actually. But I'm a firm believer in leaving people with a message. And my background's in cartography and map design. And really, what I want you guys to know is that cartography, or the designing of this Wisconsin land information, is still very important. And that medium is actually kind of a tangent to this. Now, where does this title for the talk come from? Basically, last summer, I believe it was, Martin, and actually I need to give a shout out, thank you to the WLIA for inviting me to talk, and Martin as well. I'm really honored to be here. Got a little discombobulated there. But I was asked to talk about why paper maps still matter. And this got me thinking. I was super excited about this because I was trained in print cartography using, some of you may remember Macromedia Freehand, maybe not, back in the 1990s. And at heart, I am a print cartographer. That's what I've taught at all these different universities that I've been teaching at, etc. And I was like, yes, I want to give a talk about why paper maps still matter. And so, very enthusiastically, I agreed, and I started thinking about this, and suddenly I hit an existential crisis. Do they? And then I felt like a phony, right? What if I come up here, and I don't know if they totally do still matter, and then I'm espousing it, and how much of this is just nostalgia for what I knew, and Macromedia Freehand, I mean, I remember weeping when they canned that program. So, it got me thinking. And another weird thing about it was, as Martin said, that I'm now actually, my new job is promoting web mapping. So there was another existential crisis that if I could come up here and I say that I really believe in paper maps, but by the way, we're offering a master's in web map programming, it seemed a little like, kind of like the politicians running right now, saying one thing, but do I mean it, etc. So, I went back and I thought about this. What does it mean to matter? And what made paper so special to so many of us? And I just realized I can walk around. So now you guys are in trouble because I have a laser pointer too. So if I see anyone snoozing. But what was so special about paper? Like, what made it so great? And did it really matter? Has it always mattered? And then it hit me. Maybe we're thinking about this in the wrong way. And this is something I've thought about in the past. When I was writing about web maps, one thing that kind of started to confuse me a bit is we talk about web maps like they're this homogenous thing, like a web map is a web map is a web map. And we never really talk about paper maps that way. How do we talk about paper maps? How do we break them down? Oh, now I get to call on people. I'm not teaching, I forgot. But how do we break maps down? We'd say reference map or thematic map. We talk about what the map does. But with web maps, it's like it's a web map, so you presume it should be web Mercator, etc. And so then I thought maybe the medium is actually kind of misleading us. We're getting kind of sucked in by the technological evolution and changes in mapping. And really what we need to think about is the evolution of mapping and representing massive amounts of data, which most of you are doing. I know a lot of you are on the data end, but hopefully I'm hopeful that you'll take something away from this talk, because representing that data, communicating that data, creating that data in database form so people can explore that data is really important. And really what has changed is not that, it's not web versus print or mobile apps versus print. It's the interaction, so the interactivity. How we interact with maps has changed. So basically, I think we should reframe the question as tangible maps versus interactive maps. And tangible doesn't mean you can interact with them. Lord knows I've torn a few up. I've gotten so frustrated driving down, in the 1990s. Maybe it was anger issues. I don't know. But tangible doesn't mean you can't interact with them, but it does mean it's analog. You can't necessarily call up data from it, etc. And interactive maps are using digital technologies. Not all interactive maps have been web maps. Anyone remember Director? I'm really aging myself here with Macromedia references. But animated maps Maps that could interact with CD-ROM maps. Remember when you get those, what was it, Encarta Encyclopedia maps on CD-ROM, and it took like 3 hours to load on Windows 95? Turned out you had a virus. Yeah, so interactive, it doesn't necessarily mean web, it doesn't mean mobile app. We've had interactive maps now for about 30 years. It's just the technologies keep changing. So, out of the blue, Murphy's Law, I get an email and basically, hey, there's a cartographic summit going on in Redlands, you're invited. And I was flattered because, I don't know, I was sitting at my desk and this is great. And of course it's the same week as this conference. So I had a whole talk lined up for you guys. And then, when was it? Sunday through Wednesday, I go to Redlands, where all these people are sitting there talking about the future of cartography. And of course my mind was blown, and so I had to rethink this whole talk. And a lot of it has been reproduced in the last 3 days. But what fascinated me about this cartographic summit is here's Esri calling people in to talk about what is the future of cartography. And then it hit me. This has nothing to do with even tangible versus interactive maps. What this has to do with is, some psychological issue. Does cartography still matter? That's what it came down to, is they're bringing people together to talk about where can we go, what's going on in the discipline, etc. And so, basically, what I'm going to do is spend the rest of my time summarizing what all these really smart people, far smarter than I'll ever be, were talking about at this conference. And yes, I can tell you cartography does still matter. It matters a lot. And one reason it still matters is because it's medium independent. Representing spatial data, it's evolved. Yes, there are different ways to do it. Mediums change all the time. In fact, there were mediums before paper. I have a really cool sheepskin map coming up, so I don't want to, well, cat's out of the bag now, sheep. But 3 key concepts I want to review today about what stays the same regardless of medium. And I know a lot of you still, I'm sure everything's moving on the web. That's indisputable. But a lot of you still probably have to produce paper maps. And some of those key concepts from paper map production still exist, and many don't, right? Few people care about line width of roads these days with multiple zoom levels, etc. But the 3 concepts that are really important is first, designing for purpose. That's something that's often forgotten. You have tons of data, and you're like, I want to map this. You see tons of Twitter maps. Who's seen Twitter maps after the Super Bowl? Like, oh, who was tweeting about Peyton and human growth hormone use, right? Just random tweet maps, but no real purpose. So that's still important. Design for an audience. So basically, designing your maps for a particular audience. And as we'll discuss, I don't think saying we're designing maps for the public is quite narrow enough oftentimes. And I was a planner, so I know it's very difficult to design a map for a mass audience, but I think we can often do a better job. And then third, design for clarity. This is another big issue with our big data, the ability for us to process all of this data. We often forget that our job as map makers and cartographers and people presenting spatial data is to make it clear for the audience. I often think about this, and I've never actually spoken it, so maybe it's going to sound like a horrible metaphor, but I always think it would be funny if someone came up to President Obama in the morning and they actually gave him maps and said, here's an interactive map with all the Twitter data from ISIS yesterday. You make sense of it, right? Our job is to take intense data and a lot of information and make it clear for people. So let's start with map purpose. What is map purpose? It seems pretty, straightforward. It's got to be easy, but it's not. We can sometimes get tricked. Now, you didn't think you'd get away without a Star Wars reference, did you? And of course, our favorite character from all the Star Wars films, Jar Jar Binks, the Sith Lord. If you read, well, anyway, the amount of chuckles. Well, okay, he was a Sith Lord. You can check it out on the internet. It's a series. So. George Lucas, I was watching, I have a 6-year-old 2 daughters, one's 6, and really I was trying to get them interested in Star Wars because I liked Star Wars as a kid and I was just trying to stop playing house all the time. And so we were watching the making of The Phantom Menace, which is worse than The Phantom Menace, if you can imagine. But well, what really stuck out to me was George Lucas, and I was like, I was never, and he had a quote like this, this is paraphrased, but you don't use technology just because it's there. You use technology to help solve specific design problems. And that's totally true. And so we've got web technology, we have app technology, mobile technology, tracking technology, but I would argue that oftentimes we are just using this technology without any real problem to solve. And the irony here, the reason I put Jar Jar Binks up, is that George Lucas was talking about, well, I knew we could create an artificial character, like completely computer generated, so I had to do it. And I think most people who've seen Star Wars, and I know not everyone's into it, and you're probably lucky if you're not, would agree it would have been better had he not used that technology at all to create Jar Jar Binks, just left him out of the movie, right? And so he found a solution to when there wasn't a problem and created a problem with it. And I think that's often what we end up doing when we kind of fall prey to this technology fetishism where we're like, oh, we have this really cool API, like, let's just map everything at once. And often that doesn't really achieve anything. Mapping is about achieving a purpose, and generally it's communication. So the first question we always have to ask, regardless of medium, is what's the point of our map? David DiBiase, who's now at Esri, but it was around, actually, I think he was a student at UW-Madison around the time he wrote this. He basically came up with this chart of what maps can do. And it's been evolved. Academics, as we're wont to do, generally make things more complex than they have to. That's what the beauty of this chart actually I like, because since then many academics have added, they've made these three-dimensional cubes that you have to be a dolphin to understand. Dolphins are good at 3D space, that's what I said. But basically, what he says is that maps can be used for visual breakdown into two fields. They can be used for visual thinking or visual communication. Now, interestingly enough, this came out in 1990 or 91, well before the internet, once broke out with the AOL CDs they mailed to us in the mid-90s. So he was thinking about this back then. On one side, for visual thinking, you design maps for data exploration and also to confirm your hunches, right? To confirm your hypotheses. So, hey, there's lots of lead leaching into the water here. I wonder if people are going to get sick, and overlaying information and by Jove, it doesn't appear that way. So, you might not say by Jove, I don't know where that came from. So, what we have is visual thinking on one side and visual communication on the other. And most of us, at least most people in government, etc., are producing maps for the public. And this goes from everywhere from the local village all the way up to NASA, which is a government agency. They're producing maps to show information to the public. And so visual communication, synthesizing your knowledge. Hey, you might not want to drink the water in these areas because it's full of lead. To basically, this is what we know. These are the facts. Here it is. So, there are two types of maps. You can break these down into two categories. Maps for data exploration, which got tons of buzz in the mid-90s, early 2000s, and actually particularly after the attacks on the World Trade Center, we're going to use all this data and we're going to find the bad guys. And bad women too. So we use maps for exploring the data, and then all these interactive technologies allowed us to suddenly peruse these databases and look for kind of nuggets, golden nuggets of information that we could use. But it's not always better or more useful necessarily to have an interactive map, and I'll show you that in a second. Now this is kind of old spatial database exploration. Did anyone have to do this? I'm sure some of you have been in government long, and probably some of you still have to do this. I apologize. It's probably too close to home. You came here to get away from work, right? Okay, well, so this, I have to admit, interactive mapping is a much more efficient and, if not fun, because at least you got exercise doing this. Now you sit in a cubicle and just click buttons, but definitely a better way of figuring out things. So this is kind of modern. The last one was tangible spatial database exploration. This is interactive. So in this case, the technology is very useful. It's a tool that solves a specific problem. You can better look through data sets, better analyze your information. Then you have spatiotemporal exploration, right? And this is kind of all the rage to see how things have changed over time. You see this a lot now with climate maps, and I actually have a really cool one coming up. This one's the growth of Walmarts across the country. Awesome, right? I mean, it's showing the growth of Walmarts. Although studies have shown that humans really stink at analyzing this animation. I mean, what does this tell you? It started in Arkansas, and suddenly it looks like kind of a toxic pox going across the country. But what I'm trying to get at here is not that, I mean, yeah, we can make really cool animations, and this is great eye candy. You know, I could sometimes just show this to my 6-year-old daughter and go mow the lawn. She'll just stare at it all day. Which is poor parenting, I don't recommend it. This is actually probably better. This is a small multiple representation, tangible, static, printed out on paper. And actually, you can, studies have shown humans interpret small multiples much better than they do animations like the last one. Not quite as exciting, admittedly. But if you're going for clarity and the purpose of actually letting someone see how quickly and in what areas Walmart's expanded, this is pretty good. One thing that distresses me about it is the projection, but I digress. This isn't a lecture on projections. All right. The area that most of you are dealing in, I presume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sorry for being so presumptuous, is you're producing maps for communication. You're producing maps online probably to show people their properties, to let people get irate about how low their neighbors' taxes are, those types of things, right? Spy on their neighbors, see the square footage, etc. So maps for communication are generally the bread and butter of what map makers do. We take information, this is the right-hand side of the spectrum of DiBiase's chart there, and actually we make arguments. We present information. We start arguments with our tax maps. Good Lord, my neighbor was really irate. But we basically present information, and these are arguments. We're saying we have this data about the world, and this is our representation. It's to the best of our knowledge, hopefully, unless you're lying with your maps. And this is the truth as we see it. And they're posited as arguments. And there are tons of different maps for communication, right? This is why I get so upset when we just talk about web maps, because web maps do all of these things too. Now, thinking about paper maps, which was how this talk started, wow, I've gone on a tangent here, is paper, even before paper maps, we've gone through medium changes, right? So this is a map, you can kind of see the neck here of a mammal of some sort, but they drew this map on, right? I think it's a lamb or a sheep. But before paper was commonly available, they still drew maps. And so they did it on animal hides. I feel bad for the deer around here if they hadn't evolved. Reference maps on paper. So the paper reference map industry has gone on to, well, it kind of has disappeared, actually. It's gone into the ashes. But paper map reference maps. We also have interactive reference maps. So technology just keeps changing. Public participation maps. Yes, wiki maps are all the rage now, but we've had these for a long time. This is a wiki map of, what is it, the Bad River or some watershed that was going to be mined. A student at UW-Madison decided to allow people to go in and start placing their memories on the map so that they could, before the place was strip mined, they'd have a living testament basically to their memories would live forever in this map. Story maps! Oh my gosh! Esri was selling story maps all week. Like story maps this, story maps that. And they are pretty cool. But story maps have been around for a long time. Okay, so they were called narrative cartography. Now they're called story maps, and it'll be like Kleenex pretty soon. Story maps, didn't exist before Esri. That's a great marketing, and it's good. But story maps have been around forever. This is one of my favorite maps. Basically, I could never get through Moby Dick. And who in here's read Moby Dick? Kudos. Like, that's awesome. That's epic. That's a crowning achievement. Where are the awards? I couldn't. I've tried several times. Crime and Punishment, I could hack it, but not Moby Dick. So, but this map, it hangs in my office, actually, because my wife won't let me put it in my kid's bedroom. But it basically summarizes the whole story of Moby Dick and the ship going through, and you see these little things. This is a story map from 1950. You can get it, it's online everywhere, and it's also at the Library of Congress if you ever happen to be traipsing around the Capitol. Maybe Tammy Baldwin. Digital story maps. Thematic maps. Thematic maps, they were paper for a long time. Now, how do we know which one is better? What's better, a tangible or an interactive map? Well, it depends on the purpose. What's the goal? Also, as we're going to see, audience. But this is the 2015 temperatures. Now, this is pretty cool. It's got decent visual hierarchy. They've come a long way. They didn't always, they didn't always look this good and detailed. And this is one that my friend Bernard Yenny did recently. And this is an interactive map of the life of the Earth's CO2. And this is really cool because what he's been playing with, he just moved to Australia. He was at Oregon State. What he's been playing with is, web maps where you can actually change the projection on the fly. So what you're seeing is me pulling and tweaking and zooming in on the Earth while the carbon is animated throughout a year. Now, is this more effective? It depends. It's more effective, I would say, at showing people, at getting people engaged with the data, right? So I can go back and forth, but being able to play with it and zoom in and actually see the carbon emissions over your hometown, absolutely interesting. But again, what did I say earlier about animation? Anyone remember? I feel like this is a one-way topic. I don't like it. Let's move on. No? Okay. Let's go. This one's probably easier to do, right? So it depends what you're trying to do here. Are you trying to, inform people specifically, or basically let them actually interpret the information accurately, or are you trying to get them aware of carbon emissions, climate change, and excite them about it? So there are pros and cons. Zooming in and out on this, most of you are probably getting vertigo right now, I apologize. But zooming in and out on this, is really fun, but it's also kind of distracting, and it's hard to know what to look at. But I do love this map. There's also some guy narrating over it, but I spared you that. Persuasive maps. Oh, that's actually my bread and butter. That's what I've done a lot of my research on. Maps and advertising, maps for copy. And persuasive maps, for years, people have perfected these in print, but we're starting to see them also arise in interactive form. So this one is the Proposition 8 map. It came out back when Proposition 8 was being voted on in California. And this map, regardless of how you fall on the political spectrum, should raise some hairs on the back of the, wherever, neck or whatever. But basically, because what this did is it listed every donor to, I don't remember which side, listed every donor to one side of the campaign, their name, their address, and how much they donated to a cause. And so this map went up. It's public information, it's data, and it's true. Certainly it's out there. But when people start mapping this stuff, is that a little different than paper maps? What does the census do with their data, right? They don't show exact locations. But now that we have interactive maps, we have all this data out there, and anyone can make a map without thinking. In this case, these maps are like target maps for someone who's really irate or angry. We saw the same thing, and I should be fair, it just didn't look as cool. So I use it as an example. After that, that massacre at the school, Sandy Hook, when they put a newspaper created a map of every gun owner in the town. And it's the same idea. What should be mapped? What shouldn't be mapped? And is this persuasive, or is this even worse? Is it like a targeting map? I try to imagine, if you start making maps of abortion doctors' home addresses or other types of things. So this is a real issue. We've had persuasive maps for a long time, but they were static. They generally weren't as detailed. You couldn't have pop-up windows with pictures and addresses and that sort of thing. And now we've come to this. So interactivity has changed a lot of things. And then finally we have art maps. Art maps are super cool. We're seeing a ton of really unique things. Matt Dooley, I have to give a shout out up to River Falls, University of River Falls, is doing really good gunpowder maps. But we have interactive ones as well. So the big thing here is that we have all these map types. We have thematic maps, reference maps, all these different map types. And it doesn't really matter if there's tangible or interactive. What matters is basically the purpose of your map. What are you trying to communicate? Maybe an animated map is much better. Maybe an animated map will get people excited. I'm sure for school students and stuff, that animated carbon map would be much better than that kind of, no offense, but dry map by NOAA, which is very scientific, and that's NOAA's job. So but you need to think about purpose before you select your medium. Not everything has to be a web Mercator interactive map. In fact, that might ruin the purpose of your map. It might muddle your communication. But wait, so basically I've just shown that interactive and tangible maps can be used to make the same thing. How do you know which one is better? Any ideas? What's the key factor in determining what type of map to make? Yes! Who said it? Oh, you did. Someone else did too, but at the same time. That's stereo. Okay. Left ear's better, I guess. Yes, audience. So, this is a 3-year-old looking at an atlas, obviously made for kids, right? It appeals to them. This is, well, here we go. This is another atlas that I have on my iPad for my 6-year-old, and it's interactive. My 6-year-old's a little bit beyond the book. She's getting into, well, now they have iPads in like 2nd grade, my goodness. But, you know, much more interactive. She can click on things. She can see really useful information. They read her a little thing about UFOs. It's great, right? So now she's scared of UFOs. Thanks a lot. So, but audience means everything. Who are you targeting with your map? So, number 2, design for your target audience. Now, probably the biggest mistake I think we make is we think, well, I'm making a map for the public. Yeah, of course you're making a map for the public, but who's your core audience? You know, in education they say I was aiming for like the 80% of your students, because there are always going to be 10% that are way more advanced, and 10% that probably may never get it. So you shoot for the 80%. And of course we shoot for 150% where I am. But you want to figure out who your core audience is and design your maps for those people. So there are 3 questions you should always ask. Who is your main audience? So what's the target audience within the public? Is it going to be people largely over 60? Probably you want to use a tangible map, not necessarily, but you know, in the public, those that haven't used web maps too much might be more comfortable with it. Is it an audience under 30? Probably you want to get your map on Twitter, and it should be interactive. Why do people want to use your map? What makes your map useful to them? You need to think about this, and then you need to highlight that in your map. And when and where will your map be used? So this is a huge thing that they were talking about at the Cartographic Summit. You know, creating maps that actually change, which they're hoping Google does because it's way too complex probably for most of us, but creating maps that change in context. So it'd be great if we could tell our mobile map, like, actually I'm going on a hike, give me this preset, I don't need all these streets, etc. Or I'm going for a run, so just put my running route on there and nothing else. Maps that actually change on the context in which they're being used. So, who's your audience? This is key. This will determine largely whether or not you should create an interactive or a tangible map. And how many of you still create print maps? Wow, this is good. All right, I really like print maps. I wasn't saying they were dead. I'm sorry. But, so print maps, you know, so we have the Hello Kitty map. Obviously, you can make that as an interactive map. Doesn't totally work. We've got maps for you know, planning meetings, etc. Up in the upper right-hand corner. I didn't want to do that. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you need to print maps to make more sense. Let people mark them, look at them, big maps. And then, of course, we have maps for data exploration and maybe people making decisions. Then you probably want an interactive map, as I was saying. All right. Why will people use your map? This is another big issue that I think we often overlook. A planning map. Why are people using a planning map? They want to see what? How it impacts where they're living, what they're doing, right? And so this is a big issue. You know, where's the incinerator going to go? So you need to think about that and why people are using your maps. And you also need to compete. Make your maps compelling. I think that's one of the biggest issues we have as cartographers, is we tend to go to defaults rather than going the extra mile and thinking, all right, how can I make my map interesting to a map user? So this is a tourist map, a really good tourist map in my mind. It's bright, it's cheery, but it's not over the top. Of course, we have, it's a print map, interactive, an interactive medium for those analyzing, using it for scientific analysis makes sense. And then in the upper right-hand corner, we have basically a mashup. It's both interactive and you could print it out. a map for news. But thinking about why people are using a map, what information they're trying to get from it is really important. And then, when and where will your map be used? So I always like thinking about does anyone take the time to think like, where will my map be used? Like, will someone be like picking their nose in their cubicle looking at my map, or will it be up here with, being shown to presidents someday or the governor's office? This is always an interesting thing, but you need to think about that. Sorry about the urinals, but this was, did anyone see this news story? It's a pretty great idea. In New Zealand, they're trying to cut down on drunk driving. Not that Wisconsin, but so they started this policy in certain restrooms, in public restrooms, etc. They put a map up of all drunk driving fatalities right above the urinal. Now talk about a captive audience, right? When will people be reading your map? While blitzed, going to the restroom. Males, obviously you're going to have a male audience here for obvious reasons. But, and basically a captive audience, and it's pretty smart. So they made this map, they're showing the data at the right time, in the right place, and I don't know if it's helped at all, but it's pretty funny. And another thing we need to think about is, almost always there are multiple audiences for our maps. And unfortunately, I think too often we take the easy road, and we're like, well, it's one map for all, egalitarianism, etc. Maybe it's social democracy, I don't know. But, or democratic social, whatever. So, we might have to create more than one map sometimes of the same thing. And one really useful tool I found that, actually I shouldn't be plugging anything, but so I'm not going to name a company, but GeoPDFs are pretty awesome for this. You can create a really cool paper, tangible map, but then you can also export it as a GeoPDF, and people can use it on their device and it becomes interactive. They can see where they are on the map itself. But sometimes creating several maps for different audiences of the same data is also important. So you shouldn't necessarily restrict yourself. It's not an either or proposition. Tangible paper maps versus interactive web maps. No, there are lots of resources now where you can export into multiple formats. And in fact, Esri's also promoting a new, I think it's what's it called? The web app. They have this new web app where you can export to all these different things. All right, so summary item number 2, choose the appropriate medium for your audience. It won't always be interactive either. It doesn't have to be interactive. One thing I wanted to say about that urinal map, I guess my mind's in the gutter this morning, but the urinal map, would you want that to be interactive? Really? That's pretty gross. I mean, it'd be cool, and I'm sure you'd go, but no. Good. I think we're in agreement. So, map clarity, third. This is the most disgusting thing I've thought of in my life. Clarity, clarity, clarity. So often in cartography you'll hear about data simplification, generalization, etc. And at this Esri conference, there was a speaker who used to do the Time magazine maps. And I was a big buff. Time magazine is what got me into this mess in the 90s, looking at the Gaddafi maps. Yeah, that guy never got out of the news, I guess. But in the 80s and 90s. And so he came up and he gave a great talk. He said it's not about simplification or, data accuracy. He said it's about clarifying the data you have. Being honest with it, but clarifying it. And this gets back to what I said about Barack Obama. Barack Obama does not want you to bring him a map with every sighting of an ISIS fight. He wants information and being clear information. That's our job as map designers, cartographers, etc. And so the goal we should always have is never to force our map readers to think. We're the ones that are supposed to be doing the thinking. Now granted, that can lead to bias. We want to be truthful with our information. We don't want to overgeneralize, etc. But we want to basically visualize information in a way where what we're saying is clear. And that's key. And less is often, I find, almost always more. Which is hard to believe. I know we're in an era of big data. But more and more studies are showing that the more data you use, the worse decisions you make. Because what happens is the important gets lost in the noise. So, a few steps to basically data clarity. First of all, data cleaning. Garbage in, garbage out, we've all heard it. But it also means making sure that, figuring out where your data came from, how good it is. You guys know all of this for sure. But it's important, and it's the really tedious part of map design process, admittedly. For most of us. It's tedious for me. Yeah, maybe but that's fine. And I don't really use window. Data elimination. This is the thing that I think is hardest for we GIS folks to do, right? We've got all this data sets. I've got, I have this friend at La Crosse, and he's like, I've got every hiking trail with a Trimble to within 1 centimeter, and he's all excited about this. And I'm like, yeah, but at the scale we're showing it, that's ridiculous, right? It's going to look jagged, etc. And where were you in the trail? Like, the trail isn't 1 centimeter anyway. We had, long discussions. But one thing we often forget, because we have so much information, and oftentimes we want to just show it all to people, technology, woo! There's less is more, right? So some of the best maps out there, and I'm just showing this map for an example, I don't even know what it is, it's something about New Orleans, but notice that the county boundaries stop in the states, and those tan states up there, because they're not important. This is about these states that are blue. You don't need counties across the whole thing. So basically, eliminating data that's not necessary to your message, that will only distract a map reader. So it's not bad, it's not sinful or anything. I know some of us feel like, oh, I've deleted counties. No, don't worry, they're still there. But it makes map reading so much clearer, and it's really hard. Because we have this data, and we just oftentimes lump the data sets in, and we just pile more information on. And yeah, Tufte says complex graphics are great. Well, they're great if you're a nerdy scientist like me, or if you're really into GIS data like all of you probably are. But it's not necessarily good for your audience, and we need to think about that. Now, some ways to get around that, if you really want to keep the data in, is to create really, if you have an interactive map, sure, create some information windows. But even these sometimes seem to get a little too complex. We've got sliders here, etc. It depends on the purpose of the map, but this map wasn't for data exploration. And I mean, how much information are you trying to, overwhelm people with? So we need to think about that. Information visualization. I can't say this enough. There's more than a choropleth representation out there. So for 250 years, cartographers developed these beautiful different techniques of representing data. And of course, choropleth is the easiest to compute, so it's kind of the default proportional symbols. And they're very useful. I'm not dissing choropleth, so please don't tell the choropleth mafia about this. But it's okay to branch out. Other types of representations are often better. And also, just because it's not easy to make doesn't mean you shouldn't. So thinking about new ways to visualize data. One thing I will say is that interactive maps have increased, not decreased. You'd think that maybe they decreased because of how how often choropleth is used. But they've increased what types of representations are being used and what types of representations should be used a lot. And that's a good thing, I think. And we're having to rewrite some of the rules of representation in cartography. But still, we need to think about these things. And finally, the biggest thing for map clarity is visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy, visual hierarchy, visual hierarchy. And too often we just layer data layer upon data layer without thinking about how it all folds together, how it communicates our message. And so visual hierarchy, to define it for those of you that are probably rusty on your cartography 101, and that's fine, it was years ago and it was print. But visual hierarchy is bringing to the top, the surface, what's most important to the map reader or the map user, right? To your audience. And so in this case, these are venues for the Olympics in London. The pink pops out very well. The roads are there. They're clear to see, but they're subtle. They're not dominant. And then the buildings and some of the other aspects fall to the background. Visual hierarchy is a skill that's developed over time and by playing around and by looking at good maps. It really is. But only through visual hierarchy will your map make sense. If everything is on the same visual layer, colors everywhere, etc., it gets very difficult to see. I'm not a huge proponent, for example, we have all this aerial photography now, and it's awesome, because I still remember in the 1990s at ARDC up in Duluth, Minnesota, and you'd have CD-ROMs, and you might get like a square city block of aerial photography, and it was horrible resolution, and now we can just download it and throw it in our maps. But sometimes that's not good. Aerial photography often makes visual hierarchy horrible for a map user. Can you imagine, and maybe you can't, I don't know, we lose our imaginations as we get older. If this had an aerial photograph underneath it, like the buildings mean anything to me, I'm not a bird, right? So sometimes that would make the map much more difficult to read. So, takeaway on there, the best maps are not necessarily interactive or tangible. The main point of cartographic communication is clarity. Getting your message across clearly, emphasizing the most important data, Thinking about your map audience, so like emphasizing it to the right audience, etc. So, I'll conclude. You guys look like you need coffee. That's fair. I do too. Sorry, personal pain. So are paper maps still important? It depends. It really does. They're important to many of you, obviously, because most of you raise your hands. You're using them all the time. I think they're super important. I love them. I'll always make them. But are they always perfect? Are they always right? No. And it's kind of it's a question. You choose your medium based on your need, right? You should never let, I guess that's the other takeaway, probably the next one. But you never should let the medium dictate what you make. And that's really important. Does cartography still matter? Yes. It doesn't matter what medium we use. It doesn't matter if in the future, actually it's probably going to go to those 3D lens things. I can't see 3D, so I'm going to be walking into walls. But it doesn't matter when the medium shifts, which it will. It'll continue to evolve, and it's evolving more rapidly than it ever did. I think we became dependent upon paper. But cartography still matters. It's still about purpose, audience, and clarity. And that'll never change. And a lot of these concepts might have to be tweaked a little, like I was saying, line width doesn't matter so much. Flannery circles versus, what does that mean in 3D space? But cartography still matters. So, takeaway from this, don't design maps to make use of a particular medium. Select the appropriate medium to design your useful maps. And one of my biggest things that I want you guys to think about, sorry, I'm not lecturing, I forget. But think about is not just using WebMercator because you can, because you have a cool API. If it doesn't really show your information well, do something else, maybe even a tangible map instead of a web map. And then finally, design for map purpose, design for audience, and design for clarity. So, thanks. I'll take questions.